I'm Marshall Kozlov, and this is Arsenal of Democracy.
Never before has our American civilization been in such danger as now. Danger against which we must prepare. But we well know that we cannot escape danger by crawling into bed and pulling the covers over our heads. We must be the great arsenal of democracy.
In today's episode, I'm joined by my Hudson colleague, Mike Doran, to discuss a recent piece he wrote focusing on how, in many ways, Israel and the West's policy when it comes to military preparedness are premised on the existence of a Star Wars-like paradigm where everything comes down to technology, innovation, light footprints, and the like. Instead, Mike argues that we live in a world that's closer to Mad Max, where boots on the ground, where direct conflict, where basic munitions are at the core of our political, military, and economic conflicts themselves. So in this conversation, we go into how this impacts Israel's war in Gaza, how this affects the United States, and how we could see these realities playing out in the war in Ukraine.
The Star Wars paradigm says technology will win wars. Mm-hmm. It's not just it will give us enhancements. It will actually win wars. It will actually, everything that is new will make everything that is old obsolete, and that all of the big, heavy militaries of the 20th century, those things are things of the past. Wars will be short, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're short and they will be asymmetric. If you look at Ukraine, you look at Gaza, we see, no, actually, wars are between big, heavy armies. You have to take territory, you have to hold it. You need all of those traditional assets of armor and artillery in order to hold territory. Wars are going to be long. They're not going to be short. They are going to be, they're going to have a high operational tempo. Ukraine and Gaza, that's the character of war today.
Hope you all enjoy the conversation. Michael Doran, welcome back to Arsenal of Democracy.
Great to be here.
So I just said we were going to start this episode a little lighter than normal, but I think it's incredibly relevant to the theme. Did you watch Furiosa, a Mad Max saga?
I did not.
This is
the latest.
We're talking about Mad Max world today, and this is
so embarrassing. I didn't watch it. I didn't even know it existed until after we wrote this article, because I Googled the article. I wanted to send the link to somebody, and I Googled it, and an ad for the movie came out, and I didn't know that there was a new version.
That went better than I could have possibly imagined, because I was just going to harangue you about, because Mad Max Furiosa did not do well at the box office. I really enjoyed it. It's a great movie. Just didn't quite sell well. So not only did you not see it in theaters, you didn't know it was in theaters, what got you thinking then about a Mad Max world, about that theme?
Okay, so that's another very easy and embarrassing question to answer, because the metaphor Star Wars and Mad Max is actually from my co-author Kasapalu. It's his, not mine. So,
Michael Doran, what do you do here? What is this?
I just push a broom around here. In fact, I don't even know why you're having me on.
This is very fair. So what I will do as a person who's seen both Star Wars and Mad Max is point out that this is a fascinating conversation, because we're basically talking about two different paradigms for understanding modern conflict. One that I think offers a lot of challenges, opportunities, but also pitfalls. So how about you just introduce the paradigm at least for us?
The paradigm, first of all, we were trying to do two things simultaneously. One is we were trying to describe what was the mistake that the Israelis made, not just in terms of the intelligence failure on October 7th. Obviously, there was a huge intelligence failure. But also, it's clear that beyond the intelligence failure, that they were not prepared for the war that they're in. They were totally unready. So how is it that you have one of the most advanced militaries in the world, one that is commonly referred to as the fourth most powerful military in the world, and it's completely unprepared for this for this conflict? And so we wanted to describe that particular problem, but then we also, and this really is more the influence of John Casampolo than me here. We wanted to say that this is part of a larger Western failure. The Israelis the Israelis had the wrong military paradigm. They built a military that was not equipped to meet the challenges of the present day. And in doing that, they're not alone. They were following there's a kind of specific Israeli mistake or element to this mistake, but they were following the lead of the United States and all NATO militaries except one, which is Turkey, by the way. We can talk about that later if you want. But in building what the Israelis called a small, smart military, on the belief that technological advances, that a technologically advanced power can stave off a technologically, I don't know, just say disadvantaged, backwards sounds too strong.
Deficient
as technologically deficient power purely on the basis of their technological prowess. And that's what the Israelis believe, that they could build this small army based on air power, technology-driven intelligence assets and special forces, and they would have this, smart fence around Gaza and all of these sensors, which would be able to substitute for a very large ground force with all of the traditional 20th century assets that militaries had, like tanks, artillery, and so on. Because the Star Wars paradigm says technology will win wars. It's not just it will give us enhancements. It will actually win wars. It will actually, everything that is new will make everything that is old obsolete, and that all of the big, heavy militaries of the 20th century, those things are things of the past. Also, states will not fight each other anymore. Wars will be short, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're short, and they will be asymmetric. And so if you look at Ukraine, you look at Gaza, we see, no, actually, wars are between big, heavy armies. You have to take territory. You have to hold it. You need all of those traditional assets of armor and artillery in order to hold territory. Wars are going to be long. They're not going to be short. They are going to be. They're going to have a high operational tempo. We're not just going to have little quick. All of this, of course, comes out of the war on terror, the U.S. war on terror, the United
Gulf
States
War too,
and the Gulf War, right? The United States fighting Iraq, the United States fighting Al Qaeda, ISIS, and so on. That's the way of the future. We don't actually have state-on-state conflicts anymore, like we see in Ukraine. But no, what we say is Ukraine and Gaza. That's the character of war today. And we call it Mad Max, Star Wars, because of the idea that technology, you can just zap the enemy from the sky with your ray beam. The Mad Max idea is that war is going to be it's going to be a mix of traditional assets like tanks and artillery with 21st century innovation. So you'll have satellite. You'll have satellite target identification, but you'll have a 20th century artillery piece actually shooting at the target.
What I love about this, and I'll add one thing too, it's not just a mistake that technology will win wars, it's that technology will also deter wars from happening in the first place. Something I'm curious about, I'd love for you to articulate how you think the October 7th Israeli military, IDF, conceived of itself. So when I think of I don't want to say propaganda, but when I think of the marketing in this category, I think of Startup Nation. I have a book called The Weapons Wizards. It's focused on this very specific conception of the IDF that's very 21st century, that also leans into strengths that Israel clearly has. At an operational level, how did that mythos influence the story that Israelis told themselves?
Well, the Star Wars conception, like I said, was a NATO American conception, but then when it comes to Israel, the Israelis were, I think, very easy marks because the Star Wars idea played to all of the things that they loved about themselves anyway. And in Israel, the people who are at the top of the pecking order, socially, I'm talking about, are pilots. They think very highly of themselves, like pilots do everywhere. But in Israel, there's the Ezra Weizman, who was a former. He's passed away now, but it was the chief of the Air Force, and he had a phrase that really caught on, which is the best to the Air Force. So the Air Force is the best of the best. The Israelis, just after the pilots come the special forces, Sayeret Matkal and groups like that. And then, of course, Israel thinks very highly of its intelligence service. So if we have technology-driven intelligence, super intelligence that's going to identify the key targets to hit, and then the Air Force will hit it maybe together with the special forces. So all of those groups that Israel already pride, and of course they pride their technological innovation.
Yeah,
the Shmoni Matayim, the 8200 unit, which in the book Startup Nation says that a lot of the tech innovation in Israel comes out of the military and specifically out of Shmoni Matayim. So these are the people that Israelis thought most highly of in any case. And now there's this new ethos, this new military paradigm, which says they can win wars. We almost don't even need the rest of the military, because the best among us can win wars on their own. I'm of course exaggerating, but that's a little bit of a caricature at a narrative level. That's where they were at, and of course, October 7th came as an incredibly rude shock.
I also think, so two things in response. Number one, I love the Star Wars versus Mad Max concept, not just operationally, but I also think it describes visions of the way the world actually works.
Yeah.
So one vision is, I don't want to say clean, but it's straightforward.
Antiseptic.
It's antiseptic. That's exactly it's kind of like an Apple store.
Yeah.
Versus a version that is anarchic, and there's literal rape and there's literal pillaging, and it changes your conception of what you're actually trying to do here. And I also think that when we think to the propaganda side of the Israel-Gaza conflict, I do not think a Star Wars mentality, I think, prepares you to articulate what you're trying to do. It doesn't prepare you for the medium. You also go into part of the actual dynamics. So I really want to focus on that. But broadly speaking, the reason why I wanted to chat with you about this show, because we haven't done an aggressive focus on Israel-Palestine, because obviously there's a lot of focus on that at Hudson here, is I think there's a real danger in the West, and you capture this in your piece, of now that there's so much investment going into the defense technology space. We've had lots of folks from that space on this podcast. Palantir, the VCs, et cetera. I too often hear articulations that are basically the Star Wars thing to the letter.
Once you become aware of it, it's ubiquitous.
So how does one recognize the Star Wars opportunity while also recognizing that if we actually look at these conflicts and the, I think, specific threats, they're of the Mad Max variety? What does a balancing act between these two dynamics look like?
I think you have the most important thing is that you have to have advocates in your system for the Mad Max worldview. And if our military isn't working to create those, they should be doing it quickly. There's a very interesting clip. I think I definitely quoted it in the Mad Max article, in the Star Wars Mad Max article. What was the name of it? Gates of Gaza is the name of the article. I definitely quoted it in Gates of Gaza, but I don't know if I quoted the whole thing. There's a guy named General Goffman. And Goffman is now the military advisor to Netanyahu. And there's this amazing clip on the internet which circulated after October 7th. A couple of years ago, when Gadi Eisenkot, who was chief of staff at the time and one of the big proponents of small, smart military, Eisenkot was finishing up his term as chief of staff of the military, and they had a meeting at a big stadium of all the top brass, all of the senior officers. But we're talking about hundreds of people. They had some kind of conference, a leadership conference for the military. And Goffman stood up and he basically said to Eisenkot in front of the entire leadership of the military, said, you are moving. You're going in the wrong direction. This is not a direct quote, but this is the gist of what he said. You're going in the wrong direction because you're building this small, smart military. The way he said it is he's from armored. So he said, we want to fight. We're ready to fight. The problem is you will not use us. And he said there is developing a very dangerous pattern here where we don't actually go in on the ground and do anything on the ground, and therefore we don't have friction with the enemy. And this is what I thought was so interesting is he said, he basically was saying one of the best ways that he said you have to have friction with the enemy in order to build actually the officers who can lead men in war. You actually have to go to war and go up against the enemy. That was interesting. But more interesting to me as an intellectual is that he said this is how you learn what the enemy is. This is how you don't actually have a military if you're doing everything from the air and through cyber intelligence, and you're not actually getting in the trenches with them, seeing them eye to eye, then you don't know who they are. And I thought that was interesting, is that friction as a source of intelligence about the enemy. He turns out to be 100% correct. I don't know enough about the American military to know, how well they've got it right or don't have it right. But you need to identify those guys. That's the right guy. He, by the way, on October 7th, he was also personally a hero. He's among those. There was a handful of generals, retired generals and generals. He was active duty, who just didn't wait. There was such confusion about what was going on. He didn't wait for orders. He just picked up his gun and ran to the sound of the gunfire, and he was wounded as a result.
This is where I'll speak up for the IDF, and I think this gets it to where bad policy actually stems from. Not only is the Star Wars paradigm, I think, a good story for Israel to tell about itself, but I think it's also a response to severe limitations that Israel faces. Limited population. Obviously, there's a reserve system that isn't really designed for long-term force deployment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this technological solution actually leans into those weaknesses. So what are the proper Israeli responses to those weaknesses where I think the good seeds of Star Wars emerge from?
Well, that's impossible for me to answer. I can talk around the problem.
Yeah, talk around the problem.
But I can't actually solve it because I don't understand it well enough. But let me add one other element here, which is really relevant in Israeli politics today, literally today, and that is that. So you mentioned the reserve system. Israel's military paradigm is built on a couple of ideas. One is that if there's going to be a longer conflict, it will mean calling up reserves. So you have to call mainly men, but men and women who are in their 30s, in their 40s, who are working in the economy. You have to take them out of the economy and put them in the military. So it's extremely expensive. It's a huge drain on the economy to do that. And so you want to avoid that, and you want to be able to take the conflict to the enemy early, and you do that through your Air Force. Yeah. That's the thing. But the other problem you have with Israel is that the ultra-Orthodox Jews don't serve in the military for the most part, and the Arabs, for the most part, don't serve in the military. And those are among the young people of Israel. Their percentage is quite high. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but drafting those two social groups is a recipe for political conflict. So it's one of those problems that people just keep kicking down the road, and now there's a huge political pressure because so many people are dying, and so many people are on extended reserve duty and having to leave their families and their jobs. So there's an enormous pressure on the government now to start particularly drafting the ultra-Orthodox. And this is also part of the huge cleavage between right and left in Israeli politics.
Yeah.
Part of the right these days is the religious versus the secular people. Of course, the whole fight they had before the war about the judicial reform was bound up with that problem. So it's an incredibly complex problem for the Israelis, and the small, smart army kind of just allowed them to get around.
It just totally gets, and that's why I like focusing. And this is why it's okay that you talked around the problem, because it's not as if you're not presenting Mad Max, in my understanding, as like the solution, because that creates other problems too in of itself.
Yeah,
and as a policymaker, you have to.
Yeah, the Israeli answer is going to have to be a hybrid. Mm-hmm. Plus the small, smart military that they built, it has they can't get rid of key elements of it, like the Air Force, because if you look at the conflict they have now, they're fighting Hezbollah, mm-hmm. they're fighting Hamas, and they're fighting Iran, not to mention the Houthis, mm-hmm. all simultaneously. They actually have a depending upon how you count it, a 5 or a 7 front war. Mm-hmm. They in Israel's next war, in this war, they may actually have to go carry out very complex operations in Iran. Mm-hmm. That requires the kind of force that they've been building. If they have to go up against Hezbollah, then they're going to have to go in on the ground in Lebanon. That requires the big army that they didn't realize, I think, as they now see with Hamas, though, that if they're going to vanquish Hezbollah or significantly deter it, they're going to have to go in heavy on the ground, and they didn't really build a force for that. So they have to have a mix somehow that's capable of doing both. How they're going to arrive at that, I don't know. But I guarantee you there are minds that are already trying to wrap their heads around this.
You too write in the piece how one of Israel's actual weaknesses here is it's overly dependent on the United States for defense industrial needs.
Well, it's an amazing thing, because the Israeli military is stronger than it has ever been, but it doesn't have what we call operational sovereignty. It is dependent on the United States for some very basic things, including the most important thing are the rounds, the interceptors that its Iron Dome, its missile defense system uses. Those are manufactured in the United States. So if they go to war against Hezbollah now, the Israelis, and the Iranians attack them, they need the United States in order to protect themselves against Iran. They can't do it on their own. That gives Biden enormous leverage over them. He's withholding weapons. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu came out and said, "You are withholding weapons from us. We're fighting Iran. Give us the tools, and we'll finish the job." Quoting Churchill. So Israelis, for all that they're stronger than ever, they don't have operational sovereignty, and they're really feeling it. It's interesting that I mentioned at the beginning that the Turks are the one outlier in NATO in this regard. In 1974, the U.S. put an embargo. When the Turks went into northern Cyprus, the U.S., their ally, put an embargo on them, and they made a decision then never to be dependent on the United States or on their allies for basic warfighting materials. And so they never went for Star Wars. They have always been a Mad Max military, and they're better positioned to deal with the world then as a result.
And the last quick question is, as you do point out in the piece, a lot of this Star Wars weapons wizardry at a doctrinal level stemmed from NATO documents and NATO conceptualizations that now have been moved on from post-2022 because they're really conceptualized around Russia no longer being a strategic threat. Where has the broader West or NATO ended up now that we're moving on from those conceptions ourselves?
That's also evolving. You know, we I don't think they're totally there yet. I know they're not there yet. You see the fact that some of the statistics that we came up with in putting this together are really, to me, were mind blowing. Mm-hmm. North Korea has delivered 2 million artillery rounds to Russia during this war. Europe promised Ukraine 1 million and couldn't deliver it because they're not making it. I mean, our militaries got out of the business in terms of the defense industrial base of producing some of the most basic material for war, as as it has traditionally been fought, artillery rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone decided along the way that artillery wasn't going to play a big role in warfare anymore, and so it wasn't necessary to manufacture artillery rounds. The United States just recently signed a contract with Turkey. The Turks are going to build are going to manufacture artillery rounds in Texas for the United States. It's amazing.
And this is where the tragedy of you not watching Mad Max or Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, is. The movie is basically about a place called Bullet Town. Bullet Town and the logistics of getting from Bullet Town to a different town. We could have spent another 30 minutes talking that through, but that will have to be left on the cutting room floor. Mike, thank you for joining me on Arsenal of Democracy.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe below so you don't miss any episodes of Arsenal of Democracy. If you'd like to learn more about the topics covered on this episode, or just are interested in broader content on U.S. foreign and domestic policy, be sure to go to hudson.org. See you soon.